Let's shut it down.
Well, it could be a death blow for the GOP's latest effort to get rid of Obamacare, now that at least 3 Republican senators say they will vote no on the measure. And President Trump reacting to it all. We've got that for you this morning. Good morning.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot for you this morning. Absolutely. I'm Heather Childers. We are live on Capitol Hill after President Trump took to Twitter to attack Senator John McCain, one of the GOP senators coming out against the Graham Cassidy health care bill. Senators Susan Collins, Rand Paul, and Ted Cruz also say they're against the legislation, but aides to Cruz say that he might back it if some changes are made. Lisa Murkowski, you've heard of her. Well, she's still said to be on the fence, but with a razor-thin Republican majority, opposition from 3 senators would doom this bill. And Laura Ingraham, anchor of our new primetime show, The Ingraham Angle, weighed in on the developments on Fox and Friends earlier today.
They just botched it from the beginning. Now they're up against this, supposed time deadline, and they're trying to cram through something that really isn't a real repeal. I think Rand Paul is right on that. Is it better than nothing? Maybe. But they're here because Mitch McConnell couldn't get the job done on full repeal.
Well, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live for us with more on the story. Hi, John. What's happening?
Heather, good morning to you. We should just tell you that the ceremonial guard is posting itself here in the driveway of the White House because the Spanish Prime Minister will come calling very soon. The president right now meeting with bipartisan members of the committee on the House Committee on Ways and Means, be talking about tax reform, likely the budget, and as well probably mentioning the effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. And the president said just a couple of minutes ago, and we'll have the play out for you soon, that he will be visiting Puerto Rico next Tuesday to see the hurricane damage there and the federal relief efforts. Now to the Graham Cassidy bill and the efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare. White House officials told me this morning that they haven't given it up for dead just yet, though they agree that it's probably mostly dead, at least at this point. It may have been Maine Senator Susan Collins who put the fatal bullet in this latest effort to repeal and replace Obamacare after a partial score came out from the Congressional Budget Office that showed that while this new measure would save $133 billion off of the deficit, millions of people would be left without health insurance. Senator Collins came out and said she just can't support a bill like that. At a rally for Luther Strange in Alabama last night for today's runoff election, Vice President Mike Pence put the Collins decision in stark political terms. Listen here.
A vote against Graham Cassidy is a vote to save Obamacare. The Republican majority in Congress was not elected to save Obamacare. They were elected to repeal and replace it. And it's time for every single one of them to keep their word to the American people.
You mentioned this at the top, Heather. Let's break it down a little bit more detail. 5 senators are either no or hesitating on the bill. Collins of Maine, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who's a definite no, Senator John McCain of Arizona, Ted Cruz of Texas, and Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. The White House is hanging on to the slim hope that it can get to 50 votes. They believe that they can bring Cruz and Murkowski on board. They are even reaching out to Rand Paul. They are speaking with him about trying to get him on board and what would it take. There's somebody in the Paul camp that told me this morning that what would have to happen to get Rand Paul on board would be for those block grants that are destined for the states to either be completely removed or to at least be cut back some. Now, in terms of what might happen going forward in the Senate, if they can't get it done this time around, they may seek another reconciliation measure and get it done after September the 30th. But Senator Mitch McConnell warning on the floor of the Senate just a little while ago that if they don't get a Republican repeal bill, the Democratic idea may start to catch hold. At a debate last night, Bernie Sanders was again pushing the idea of a single-payer system, which Mitch McConnell seriously criticized just a short time ago. Listen here.
But no matter what you call it, at its core, here's what it is. A massive expansion of a failed idea, a quadrupling down on the failures of Obamacare, a totally government-run system that would rip health insurance plans away from even more Americans and take away even more of their personal health care decisions.
So where the smart money is right now is that Graham Cassidy is likely going to fail. One thing we should point out, though, Heather, is even if it does fail, it's not going to affect what will come out in tax reform tomorrow, because the assumptions for the tax reform plan that will be revealed tomorrow were done factoring in the fact that Obamacare repeal and replace would fail. Heather?
Yeah, nothing like waiting till the very last minute for a lot of maneuvering. We will see what happens. John Scott, live for us. Thank you.
Fox News Alert, and I'm John Scott. That's
what
John
in the
Roberts.
world?
But sometimes when you're looking at somebody, it's hard to get the name right. At any rate, we are awaiting comments from President Trump. Here he is in the Roosevelt Room.
Puerto Rico needs a lot of money. I'm going to Puerto Rico on Tuesday. Scheduled trip. It's the earliest I can go because of the first responders, and we don't want to disrupt the relief efforts. We're going through a lot. The mayor of San Juan was very generous and very nice this morning, was thanking us for the great job we've done with FEMA, that we really have. We've worked very, very hard in Puerto Rico. It's very tough because it's an island. In Texas, we can ship the trucks right out there, and we can do. We've gotten A+s on Texas and on Florida, and we will also on Puerto Rico. But the difference is this is an island sitting in the middle of an ocean, and it's a big ocean. It's a very big ocean, and we're doing a really good job. I want to go there. Tuesday seems to be the first time we can do without really disrupting first responders and the efforts that are being made to help people. We have shipped massive amounts of food and water and supplies to Puerto Rico, and we are continuing to do it on an hourly basis. But that island was hit as hard as you can hit. When you see 200-mile-an-hour winds, even Texas didn't have 200-mile-an-hour winds, right? But when you see 200 miles, and even more than that, 200-mile-an-hour winds hitting a place, and literally houses are just demolished. It was like tornadoes. It was like having hundreds of tornadoes, the winds. So we've never seen it. Actually touched down as a Category 5. People have never seen anything like that. And it was dead center. I mean, you couldn't be any more. And don't forget, a week before, it got hit by another hurricane. Now, that one brushed it, but that did tremendous damage, too. So Puerto Rico has tremendous problems with floods and with damage and collapse. And I mean, we're still looking for people. We're still looking for people. But I'm going to be going there on Tuesday, and I may also stop at the Virgin Islands. The governor there has done a terrific job of, he's been devastated, but he's done a terrific job. And he's been very generous with what he said about the relief effort. The FEMA folks have worked so hard. We thought after Texas they could take a little bit of a rest. FEMA, what they have done is incredible. So they go from Texas to Florida. They happen to stop at Louisiana in between. And now Puerto Rico gets hit. But they've been there, and they've been doing a really good job. So I'll be there on Tuesday, and perhaps some of you will be with me. Okay?
Is Puerto Rico important?
Puerto Rico is very important to me, and Puerto Rico, the people are fantastic people. I grew up in New York, so I know many people from Puerto Rico. I know many Puerto Ricans, and these are great people, and we have to help them. The island is devastated. It's, some people say, I read this morning, it's literally destroyed. The infrastructure was in bad shape, as you know, in Puerto Rico before the storm, and now, in many cases, it has no infrastructure. So you're really starting from almost scratch. But these are great people. They're wonderful people. They're hardy people. They'll be back. But we're helping them. I think we're really getting really good marks for the work we're doing. We are literally landing water, food, supplies on an hourly basis. And this is to an airport that has been devastated. We're not talking about runways that are open and, please land your plane right here. These are airports. These runways are devastated and broken. The airports are broken. So those people are very important to all of us. I think I can speak for everybody sitting around this table. So we're working very, very hard on Puerto Rico, and we're also getting tremendous efforts, and we're sending tremendous amounts of supplies to the Virgin Islands. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
President Trump there in the Roosevelt Room of the White House meeting with House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady and other members of the Ways and Means Committee, both Democrats and Republicans. They're going to be talking about tax reform, and we will be talking about that in a minute as well. But right now, the imminent collapse of the last attempt, or the latest attempt, to try to repeal and replace Obamacare. It appears that the Graham-Cassidy bill is going nowhere, and will not pass the Senate even if it gets brought to the floor. Joining us now, Niall Stanage, White House columnist at The Hill, and David Catanese, senior politics writer at U.S. News and World Report. Niall, there was so much optimism on the Republican side of the aisle for the last couple of weeks. Oh, we're going to get this. We think we've got the votes this time. Now, every day, it seems like a new Republican senator is coming out in opposition. What happened?
I think that basically what happened was that John McCain coming out really stopped the momentum for this bill. I think more broadly, Republicans are worried about a certain lack of detail, or at least some are concerned about that. And I think we're already seeing things move toward a kind of blame game. The president has sought to blame John McCain. Some people will talk about the president, the buck stopping with him. But I think if you talk to allies of President Trump, they place a lot of blame with Republican leaders in Congress. They feel that they simply didn't get the job done, not just this time, but in the previous attempts that we've seen to repeal Obamacare.
I want to play a bit of sound from a collection of senators from both parties, but it begins with Mitch McConnell, a guy who finds himself on some thin ice over all this. Listen.
If Obamacare's failure has shown us anything, it's that we need new ideas and a better approach. That's what the Senate pursued this summer. That's what Senators Graham and Cassidy are pursuing now.
Colleagues, nobody has got to buy a lemon just because it's the last car on the lot. This Trump care bill is a health care lemon, a disaster in the making. The fact that it's the last Republican repeal bill standing doesn't make it okay.
The new Trump care is bad policy. It's being jammed through this body at an alarming, ludicrous pace.
Enough with playing politics with people's lives. It is time we drop Graham Cassidy, drop Trump care once and for all, and join together to actually work to improve health care, starting with acting right now to lower premiums for families and strengthen health care in a bipartisan way.
It's kind of funny, David. Democrats are all about bipartisanship now when the original Obamacare passed with no Republican support whatsoever.
Well, and let's be clear, there was a bipartisan effort going on while this Graham Cassidy bill was being formulated between Patty Murray, who you had in that clip, and Lamar Alexander to sort of stabilize the markets. But that was put aside when Republicans thought they could get this through. Now, I don't even think this will come up for a vote. Mitch McConnell's speech last night on the floor seemed to be turning the page on this. He was thanking the committees that handled it. He thanked Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy, but he basically was signaling that he doesn't have the votes and he is not going to take a loss. This could be a very tough week for Mitch McConnell, given what's going on in Alabama and his preferred candidate. If he doesn't get an Obamacare repeal and loses that Senate race down in Alabama tonight, it's going to be a very tough week for the Senate Majority Leader.
Well, the White House, there are a couple of articles out there, Niall, that suggest that the White House is ready to go after Mitch McConnell to really try to undermine him as a result of these Obamacare repeal failures. Is that, I don't know, is that the kind of action that is deserved?
It's certainly the case that there is a lot of bad feeling between the White House and Mitch McConnell, and it is certainly the case that people around President Trump blame McConnell for a lot of this. Now, in fairness to the White House, when they come out and say that Republican lawmakers promised for 7 years to repeal and replace, that's a statement of fact. I mean, that's exactly what they did. And I think this gets to the kind of annoyance with Washington that powered President Trump's rise when he was a candidate. You've had this promise made to conservative grassroots voters for so long, then Republicans get the White House and the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they still don't get the job done. I think that is what is underlying a lot of these animosities between the White House and Capitol Hill.
But the people who elected President Trump, David, I mean, there are also voters in New York and California, for instance, who elected members of the legislature who are very different ideologically from President Trump. And, you know, those folks have to be dealt with. This kind of, I don't know, bipartisanship, whatever you want to call it. It seems like it's going to take the efforts of both parties to somehow fix the Obamacare problems.
Yeah, and it's just math. I mean, the Republicans do not have a big margin in the Senate. It's 52-48. They can only lose 2 Republicans. But I would also insert public opinion on this. There's a poll this morning out that showed that 55% of Republicans are against cutting federal Medicaid funding. And if you've talked to Susan Collins, you talked to Lisa Murkowski, what they are worried about is the backlash from their own constituents from slowing spending for poor people that depend on health care, that depend on Medicaid program, the program that provides health care for the poor. So, again, I think, looking at those clips of John McCain that the President Trump has tweeted out, he was, very much for repealing Obamacare. But then what are the details? What are the repercussions? I don't think he's answered that.
Stay with us now, the president on tax reform.
Good morning. I'm honored to welcome Republican and Democrat members of the House of Ways and Means Committee to the White House. We've been meeting long and hard. We've been meeting for quite some time, and it's been very interesting, and we're going to have a big announcement tomorrow. I'd like to thank Committee Chairman Kevin Brady. Thank you, Kevin, very much. And Ranking Member Richard Neal for being here today. Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it. I've asked lawmakers of both parties to join us to discuss our framework for tax cuts and tax reform before it will be released tomorrow. We'll be releasing a very comprehensive, very detailed report tomorrow, and it will be a very, very powerful document. Our plan is based on 4 very crucial principles. First, we must make our tax code simple and fair. It's too complicated. People can't do it. American taxpayers waste 6 billion hours each year complying with the tax code. Under our plan, the vast majority of Americans will be able to file their tax return on a single page without extra record keeping and all of that paperwork. So we're going to make it very, very simple. It's called simplification. Second, we will cut taxes tremendously for the middle class. Not just a little bit, but tremendously. That includes nearly doubling the standard deduction that most families take on their taxes and increasing the child tax credit, which families really want and have been talking about it for a long time. Third, we will lower tax rates for businesses to create more jobs and higher wages for Americans. America has the highest business tax rate anywhere in the developed world. We're the highest taxed nation in the developed world, and I think the undeveloped world too. But, I have to be very accurate with these people because they'll start claiming all sorts of things. So we'll just keep it in the developed world, Mike, okay? But we're the highest taxed nation in the developed world, and we want to become one of the lowest, and that's what we'll be doing. And we'll be announcing those numbers tomorrow. We want to go over them with the committee, but they're set. And the jobs will start pouring in from all over the world, coming back to our country. They've left our country, so many of the jobs, and they'll be coming back in because we have a non-competitive tax structure right now, and we're going to go super competitive. Finally, we want to bring back trillions of dollars in wealth parked overseas. We want this money invested right here in America. You have close to $3 trillion, and it could be much more than that. Nobody really knows what the number is, but we know it's substantially more than $2.5 trillion. And that money is overseas, and that money will come pouring back based on what we're doing and the incentives that we're giving. I look forward to working with the members of Congress gathered here today to pass the reform and the massive tax cuts that our country desperately needs to thrive, to grow, to prosper. If we do this, we will create millions of new jobs for our people and bring many, many businesses back to our shores. We will become a competitive nation again. We won't see companies leaving our country, firing their people, and going and then selling their product, by the way, back into our country with no tax and no retribution. That will all stop. It's time for both parties to come together and do what is right for the American people and the nation that we all love. So I want to thank everybody very much for being here, and I look forward to getting to work. And again, we've been working on this for a long time, but this is the finishing touches. And Kevin, again, thank you. And Richard, thank you, and all of you folks. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. We were very disappointed by a couple of senators, Republican senators, I must say. We were very disappointed that they would take the attitude that they did. We don't know why they did it. You can sort of figure that, but we'll see what happens. I mean, you know, it's going along, and at some point there will be a repeal and replace. But we'll see whether or not that point is now or will it be shortly thereafter. But we are disappointed in certain so-called Republicans.
How much money do you think Puerto Rico needs?
Puerto Rico needs a lot of money. I'm going to Puerto Rico on Tuesday. Scheduled trip. It's the earliest I can go because of the first responders, and we don't want to disrupt the relief efforts. You know, we're going through a lot. The mayor of San Juan was very generous and very nice this morning, was thanking us for the great job we've done with FEMA. That we really have. We've worked very, very hard in Puerto Rico. It's very tough because it's an island. In Texas, we can ship the trucks right out there, and you know we can do. We've gotten A+ on Texas and on Florida, and we will also on Puerto Rico. But the difference is this is an island sitting in the middle of an ocean, and it's a big ocean. It's a very big ocean, and we're doing a really good job. I want to. I'm going to go there. Tuesday seems to be the first time we can do without really disrupting first responders and the efforts that are being made to help people. We have shipped massive amounts of food and water and supplies to Puerto Rico.
So the president is now getting into remarks that we carried for you earlier, so we're going to break away from that. That was a meeting with the House Ways and Means Committee. The president very interested in tax reform legislation that will come out of the legislature. Let's talk to one of the pivotal people involved in that. Senator John Thune of South Dakota joins me now. He is the Senate GOP conference chair. We're going to get to health care in a minute, Senator. Obviously, health care, you know, Obamacare repeal and replacement efforts have gone down in flames, or so it appears. What about the prospects for tax reform? Can you get it done?
Well, we have to get it done. It's, again, something that's critically important to our economy. If we want to restore growth in the economy, create better paying jobs, raise wages for people in this country, we need to reform our outdated tax code and make it more competitive. Otherwise, we're going to continue to hemorrhage jobs and businesses to other parts of the world. So we're very focused on this. The president and his team, the House and the Senate, leadership and our members all realize that this is an issue that we cannot afford to fail on. We need to deliver for the American people.
Do you think you'll have Democrats on board? Will this be bipartisan?
I think it can be bipartisan, but I think we're going to have to prove that we can deliver the votes. I think there are Democrats who are willing to vote for a tax reform bill along the lines of what we're talking about, but I assume that they're not going to vote for it unless Republicans can demonstrate that we have the votes to pass it on our own. And then I think you might see some Democrats who are willing to in the end be in support of it. But the fact of the matter is, we've got to do this for the American people. The growth rate in this country has been 1.5% now for the last 8 years. The Congressional Budget Office says it's going to be 2% for the next 10. That's just not good enough. The historic average in America is 3 to 3.5% growth. That makes a huge difference in the level of wages, the paychecks the American people have, and how much money they have left in their pocket. So tax reform is going to be focused on middle-income Americans and trying to allow them to keep more of what they earn and to spend it on themselves and their families rather than sending it to the government.
Let's talk about Graham Cassidy now. It appears, after so much hype and hope, that issue is not going to pass the Senate. It might not even be presented. Do you know? Does Mitch McConnell plan to bring it up to a vote?
Well, that's ultimately the decision that the leader has to make. But again, one thing we know is that we made a commitment to repeal and replace Obamacare. I think this particular proposal, Graham Cassidy, is a very innovative approach consistent with what we believe ought to happen to health care in this country, and that is to distribute the power and the money and the decision-making and the control out of Washington, D.C., back to states where the innovation occurs. They're the laboratories of democracy in this country. and ensure that we are creating a competitive market out there that will bring rates down for people and allow more people to be covered. I mean, ultimately, we want to see health care that works, and right now we have a system that's failing. Skyrocketing premiums, collapsing markets. You still have almost 30 million people in this country who are not covered. Obamacare has failed, and the only question is, how are we going to fix it? Are we going to fix it with the Democrats' approach, which is Bernie Care, which will cost $32 trillion and move us to a single payer, or are we going to do it in a way that maintains flexibility for states, gives patients more choices, more options, and creates more competition in the marketplace?
When you look at the 4 senators who have announced publicly their opposition to the bill, Rand Paul, John McCain, Susan Collins, Ted Cruz, they each have different reasons for their opposition, and it seems, I guess I sympathize for Mitch McConnell in some ways in trying to craft language that would satisfy the disparate needs of these 4, or really the entire Republican conference. That's been the challenge.
It has been, John, and it's hard to explain because different members come at this from different perspectives, and obviously these all, you tweak one thing to address a concern that one senator has, and that it moves another senator in a different direction. And I think this bill strikes a balance. It's consistent with conservative Republican philosophy over a long period of time. We've got to put Medicaid on a budget, make it more sustainable for the long term, and we need to give the states more flexibility to design health insurance solutions that work for their states. One thing we know is that one size fits all out of Washington, D.C. doesn't work. It hasn't worked, and Obamacare is proof of that. So it's time for us to move forward with a different approach, and I think this approach represents that. I hope before it's all said and done that these discussions that are being held with some of the members that have issues, that we can get them on board, and that we can get the 50 votes that are necessary to take this country in a different and a better direction. And if we can pass it through the Senate, the House has said they'll take it up and pass it, and the President has indicated that he will sign it.
Let's talk about, well, if it doesn't pass the Senate, and right now it doesn't look like it's going to. There's been talk of bringing it up in the next session, perhaps attached to tax reform legislation. Do you see that happening?
Well, I think at this point, I mean, right now the focus is trying to get the votes for this right now. But if for some reason we have to pivot, I think the next step is to move tax reform, and I think that needs to be our focus. This is an issue that the American people care deeply about. It does fundamentally affect the workings of our economy, and we've got to restore, allow our businesses to be competitive in the global marketplace, and allow the American people to keep more of what they earn, particularly middle-income families. And so we've got to get this done. And I think health care is going to be addressed. I just don't, this issue's not going anywhere because these markets are in free fall. It's going to have to be fixed. But I think the focus needs to be on tax reform next, and we will revisit health care. The question is when and where. But, you know, right now I'd still like to see if we can get 50 votes this week for Graham Cassidy.
Senator John Thune of South Dakota, part of the Republican leadership team there in the Senate. You got your work cut out for you.
We do indeed.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, Americans agree with him. 7 in 10 say that tax reform should be the priority. So we'll see. Well, an entire football team, meantime, comes together. There you are, on the kneeling controversy with the Dallas Cowboys players. Did you see this? The players, the coaches, the owner, all included getting down on one knee, but then standing up for the national anthem. Why they did it and the reaction to their decision.
A Fox News alert and 1,000 people forced to leave their homes as a wildfire spreads fast in Southern California. The fire, fueled by dry conditions and flying embers, is now burning near Anaheim and other heavily populated suburbs. Residents describing the scene say they have seen raging flames up to 50 feet tall.
It was a tornado of embers going through here. At times we were kind of thinking we probably should have left.
Lajeunesse is live in Los Angeles with more on that. William.
Well, John, the fire remains out of control and a major threat to a very dense part of L.A. Right now, it is just chewing through the Cleveland National Forest, east of the city. You can see the pictures here. But winds this morning are expected to shift back towards downtown, towards the major subdivisions in Corona and Anaheim. It also turned a major highway, 91, into a parking lot this morning. Now, the intensity of this fire is partly a result of those massive winter rains, which present a double-edged sword. On one hand, the moisture makes the brush less likely to burn. On the other, it leads to a major growth of that light fuels in the grasses that keep these wildfires alive. This one exploded yesterday around 3 p.m. and has burned ever since.
The wind's one, the heat is one, another is the topography. If you look behind us here, we have some of the slopes that are very steep. They've got to get up to those slopes with the hand crews to make the direct attacks. So we're fighting all of that at this point, but they're doing a great job.
The Canyon fire is just 5% contained, despite a DC-10 tanker and 3 helicopters working overnight. High winds helped this fire rip through backyards, palm trees, tall brush to light up about 2,000 acres, forcing 1,000 residents to evacuate.
A complete war zone. It's hard to see. You don't want to be breathing this stuff. It's just undescribable.
So the concern right now is the humidity has dropped almost in half in just the last 3 hours. Temperatures today, John, in the mid-90s, some gusty winds this afternoon. The good news, eventually, we're supposed to get an onshore breeze, but in the meantime, this could push right back into those neighborhoods. Back to you.
And doesn't sound like good conditions for trying to put out a forest fire. William Lajeunesse, thank you.
Well, Justin, on the NFL kneeling controversy, with reaction coming in to the Dallas Cowboys' decision to take to the field where players, coaches, and owners included locked arms, they all got down on one knee ahead of their game. And even though they all stood up for the national anthem, some fans aren't too happy.
As they take a knee collectively, boos can be heard from this sellout crowd in Arizona.
And joining us now, Josh Holmes, former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell, and Drew Littman, former senior counselor to Health and Human Services Secretary Sylvia Burwell, and former chief of staff to Senator Al Franken. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, who knows what the score was of last night's game?
Dallas won by 2 touchdowns, I think.
Okay, all right. But the point being, not a lot of people are paying attention to the game itself, but good job on knowing that. Dallas itself, let's talk about Dallas. They banned teams from wearing these stickers that they wanted to honor all those murdered officers there in Dallas that happened back in July of 2016. They weren't allowed to do that, but they're allowed to do this. So there is some discrepancy going on. Josh, what do you think about that?
Well, what they didn't do is take a knee during the national anthem. And I think actually Jerry Jones got this one right, which is to distance any kind of concern that players want to express about systemic racial issues and potential, injustice across the country that they're specifically protesting, from respect for the flag and respect for our country. For the life of me, I can't figure out why it is that those two things were linked. I know that's where Colin Kaepernick took it from the beginning, and I think the opposition to what President Trump said earlier this week has really put themselves in a box here. Is that they basically sided with a extreme leftist community that really doesn't believe you should respect the flag or the anthem at all. And I'm sure that's not where the players want to be. I know that's not where the NFL wants to be.
Yeah, and their ratings are dipping very quickly. Drew, NBC Sunday Night Football down 7% from last week. If you compare it to 3 years ago, NBC down 10%, Fox down 16%, CBS, the only one that went up, and that was by only 4%. So what do you think they need to do to right the course?
Well, no one's seriously claiming that these drops in the ratings are because of protests during the national anthem. And what's most striking about that is this Trump effect, where you have only one person who kneeled, and he's no longer in the league. But once the president goes on attack, immediately, without any kind of orchestration, more than 100 players kneeling, and he's even radicalized Jerry Jones. Trump has had a similar effect on support for the Affordable Care Act, for Dreamers, the Paris Climate Accords. Once he attacks, support for any of these things rises very, very quickly.
See, now, people would say the complete opposite of what you're saying right now if you go out and you poll people. And then you talked about the number of football players that actually participated. That's a very small number. I mean, they've got, 1,696 players in the NFL total. So when you talk about a little over 100, 200, that's just about 1 in 8. So, Josh, do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, look, I don't think the NFL wants to see poll numbers on the views of their fans and how they view players taking a knee during the national anthem. It's not going to be good for them. And furthermore, you look at the #1 jersey that's selling this week. It's the tackle from Pittsburgh, Villanueva, who served 3 3 tours overseas representing the Army and our armed forces in battle. And, you know, I think the reaction from the American people here is, let's just separate this, for goodness sakes. It is certainly possible to have concerns about racial issues in this country and also hold our flag high and pledge our allegiance and do all the important things that this country stands for in the process.
Well, the president very clearly said that this was not about race. This was about honoring the country, honoring all those veterans. Drew, you get the final word here.
Heather, if I can address the polling issue, I'd point out that this is how civil rights protests work. You've got a minority that wants to alert the majority to a problem that the minority is suffering. If the minority's position was universally popular, you wouldn't need the protests. But protests start off as a vindication of the rights of the minority. That's what the First Amendment was created to protect.
But is this the right venue, though? I mean, has the message just gotten lost in all of this?
Totally lost. And it completely marginalizes what is an important issue to talk about. Instead, we're having an argument over patriotism, which, look, I know where the American people stand on that. I'm pretty sure where the NFL fans stand on that.
All right.
The fact that we're talking about this now suggests that it was the right venue.
Yeah, but we need to get back to talking about football. That's what we need to do. All right, Josh and Drew, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
In Puerto Rico, a humanitarian crisis still unfolding. People desperately need food, water, and shelter as the entire island nearly without power. One survivor of Hurricane Maria talks with us next about what life there is like right now. Plus, a hit and run caught on camera.
It was like instant shock. Once I realized, crap, I was in a collision, I pulled off as soon as I could.
New information about a hit and run caught on camera. A driver in Arizona with a dash cam on his car got sideswiped by another driver. He says that white BMW was trying to pass him but hit him instead, then spun out, almost hitting another car in the process. Here it is again in slow motion. Other drivers on the road came to see whether the driver of the BMW was okay, but guess what? He then took off, left the scene. Police say they have a license plate number. They are expecting they can track down whoever was driving that car.
They'll get him. Well, millions of people in Puerto Rico are still without clean water. They're without power or cell service. It's been almost a week since Hurricane Maria made a direct hit on the island, and people are worried about how they're going to be able to take care of their families.
It's been chaotic. It's been horrible. It's been like a war zone everywhere. If it was me alone, I would be here. You know, I'll stick it out. I'll not bathe for 5 days. I don't care. I'll sweat. But the kids, it's different. You know, they get hungry. They have necessities that right now I cannot provide for them.
We are joined now on the phone by one of the victims of the hurricane, Fernando Oliver. Fernando, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Heather.
So you are a native of Puerto Rico. You've lived there 40-plus years, San Juan specifically, for the majority of your life. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Not at all. We've been through several hurricanes, Hugo, Georges, Hortense. I personally have been through a couple of other hurricanes in Florida, and never like this.
What about your property, your family? How are you doing?
We took some damage, minor damage on the homes. Many homes were flooded. It was raining sideways, so the windows didn't hold up in terms of the water. So pretty much all of the population dealt with that.
Do you think... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, many others lost their homes. You know, complete roofs, complete homes destroyed. It was total devastation.
Yeah. And do you think, though, that Puerto Rico was prepared? Do you think that the preparation was put in place early enough? And do you think if that had happened, that it wouldn't be that bad?
I don't think there's any place prepared for a Category 5, maybe 4, almost 5 hurricane. The situation, the way the winds happened, the howling, the destruction. I don't think any country would be prepared for something like this, to be quite frank. However, I mean, many people bought generators in advance. Many people stocked with food, but it was for a few days, perhaps 4 days, 5 days at most. So the situation is going to get complicated here pretty soon.
And you need the generators, but you're running out of fuel. There are reports of running out of fuel. You have no power across the entire island.
That is correct. The situation right now, other than humanitarian help for those areas that are needed where there was complete flooding, people losing their whole homes, those people need a lot of help, and authorities have to get to those places that are incommunicated. In addition to that, people want to help, but they need gasoline to get to those places. And right now the lines are 4, 5, 6 hours long, and I know the government is trying to get gasoline to the gas stations that are working, but the process is not working. They need to improve the process so that people stay calm and they can help with this restoration of the country. Yeah. We need gas, we need diesel to get to the right places, hospitals, businesses, distribution centers of food, trucks need to get food from the warehouses to the supermarkets. There's desperate need for that.
Yeah, we got word that the President Trump, will be there next Tuesday. I know some other lawmakers are headed there Friday. What more can they do? And what type of help do you need from the private sector, or are you getting?
In terms of the private sector, I think the government needs to get resources to them in terms of diesel, fuel, trucks, construction, cranes, any sort of equipment that can be used to rebuild will be needed. In terms of the government getting aid to these areas that are desolated, that have no communication, food, water. There are municipalities, and the mayors of the different municipalities are claiming for help. That help needs to get to them in an orderly fashion. So I think once the gas situation settles, the diesel situation settles, we have many businesses ready to operate and run with power generators. We just need the diesel to get to them consistently so that people know what they can expect and we can get back on our feet.
Yeah, the governor warned that the possibility of a humanitarian crisis. Do you think that's taking it too far, or is that how you would describe it?
That's exactly how I would describe it. There are many areas in the island that are desolated. There are communities of people that need a lot of help. It's not. There's no exaggeration whatsoever as to what's being reported.
Well, we see the pictures.
The situation is dire, and again, as soon as businesses start opening, as soon as there's an element of normality or normalcy returns to the island, people will start getting calm, and people want to work. I see people wanting to get to their jobs, but they can't because there's no gas, and there's no gas in the stations where they need to fuel their vehicles. It's not that there's not gas in the island.
Yeah.
So that's something that needs to be clarified.
Well, Fernando, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We see the pictures. It's just completely devastating, and our prayers are with you and your family and everyone there in Puerto Rico as you try to recover.
Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good.
Well, the wife of a former high school football coach pleads guilty to having sex with one of his 16-year-old players. Well, she is getting a shorter sentence than expected. Plus, a deadly terror attack rocks Israel. Where it happened, why the timing is critical here.
Well, the Ohio Supreme Court start hearing arguments today about whether a convicted killer's death sentence should be overturned. Lawyers for death row inmate Richard Beasley say that no physical evidence linked him to the deaths of 3 men who responded to his fake job ad on Craigslist. Well, a decision is not expected for several months. And then there's this woman in Tennessee pleading guilty to having sex with a 16-year-old player on her husband's former high school football team. Kelsey McCarter pleaded guilty to 6 counts of statutory rape. She's set to serve 3 years in prison. And Nashville police say a man is facing charges for murdering and raping a 12-year-old girl who lived 2 doors down from him. They say Roy Coons entered the girl's trailer, beat her, and strangled her on August 10th.
Some new information on a deadly terror attack now in Israel, where a Palestinian man opened fire at the entrance to a settlement outside Jerusalem, killing 3 Israelis. It happened at the same time that the U.S. peace envoy arrived in the region. Connor Powell live in Har Adar, Israel. Connor.
Yeah, John, the environment for talks between Israelis and Palestinians remains extremely difficult, despite the fact that Donald Trump's envoy to the region, Jason Greenblatt, has arrived and is trying to meet with leaders on both sides. Israeli police say today's attack was carried out by a 37-year-old Palestinian father of 4. He had a work permit to come into Israel. He was a regular here at the checkpoint here into the settlement and was known by many people here as somebody who had a good head on his shoulders. But Israeli police also say he's somebody who has a troubled family situation, and that possibly led to this attack in terms of some type of snapping situation. But Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said that the attacker's home would be destroyed, and also laid blame at the feet of Palestinian leaders who, he said, incite average Palestinians to attack Israelis here and across the entire region. Now, we aren't really sure yet whether or not he was working with anyone else. However, it does appear, according to Israeli officials, that this appears to have been a lone wolf attack, something we've seen for the last couple of years here. Some young Palestinian man essentially sort of attacks Israelis, whether it be on a settlement in the West Bank or here in Israel as well. It's something we've seen. It's a trend that has been going on for several years. It's also a trend, John, that Israeli officials, security officials particularly, really don't have an answer how to stop, no matter the security arrangements they put in place. John?
Connor Powell, live from Israel. Thank you.
Well, new in the next hour of Happening Now, President Trump's border wall proposal moving forward, construction workers starting to build prototypes. But what needs to happen for the project to actually move forward? Plus, primary day in Alabama, 2 Republicans pitted against each other for the nomination of Jeff Sessions' former Senate seat. Will the man President Trump endorse his win, or will it be Steve Bannon's pick?
Right now, the FAA launching an investigation into a near collision in the skies over Illinois after a United Airlines flight from Vancouver to Chicago made an emergency climb to avoid a glider.
No one screamed, but it was, it was enough to make people grab the seats and the armrest. I couldn't see what was happening, but I knew it was out of ordinary.
Well, the passenger jet never made contact with the glider. Eventually, it landed safely at O'Hare International Airport. So somebody is going to be getting a letter from the FAA.
Well, you're a pilot. Have you ever seen anything like that, or?
Not like that.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. Was it a glider in restricted airspace? Was he not talking to somebody on the ground?
Yeah.
You would think that the jet would have known he was there, but you don't know.
Somebody wasn't talking to somebody that they should have been.
Somebody should have been on the radio. Yeah, somebody should have had a transponder on.
Yeah, it's been a very busy day. There's more to come in our next hour.
Yeah, we will be back here in 1 hour. Outnumbered starts right now.
Bye.